My daughter-in-law told the mortgage broker I was just an old expense they drag from house to house, and she said it 4 days after she'd asked me to co-sign a mortgage on a house I would never be allowed to live in. I sat at that table, in a kitchen I had built the cabinets for with my own hands, and I did not say one word. I picked up my coffee and I finished it. Then I set the cup down, quiet, and I looked at my son, and I said no. That was the whole sentence. No explanation, no raised voice, just the word, and the silence after it, and the sound of Simone's father clearing his throat because somebody in that room finally understood that something had just ended. They thought a stubborn old man had simply refused to sign a form. 19 days later, when the moving truck for their new house pulled into a driveway that was never going to belong to them, they learned exactly what that word had actually cost them. My name is Holt Kastner. I'm 68 years old, and I have spent 41 years building and repairing wooden boats on the water around Port Townsend, Washington. Before that, I apprenticed under a man named Otto Pruitt, who used to say that anybody can varnish a hull and make it shine for a photograph. But the boat that survives 40 years of open water is the boat where somebody cared about the parts nobody will ever see. That's the whole trade if you want the truth of it. The keel, the ribs, the garboard plank, which is the first plank laid against the keel, the one that takes the worst of the strain every single time that hull meets a wave, and which no passenger on that boat will ever once look at, because by the time they're standing on the deck, that plank has already disappeared under their feet. I want you to hold on to that idea, because it is the spine of everything I'm about to tell you, and it is going to cost me something when I get to the end of it. I built a 19-foot lapstrake day sailor in 1988 that is still on the water today, still owned by the same family, 3 generations of them now. I could walk you down to the marina, put my hand flat on the inside of that hull, and tell you exactly where I doubled the frame, because I didn't trust the grain in one piece of oak. Nobody who has ever sailed that boat has any idea that reinforcement is there. It's not the pretty part. It's not the part anybody admires. But pull that frame, and the whole boat comes apart in one bad season, and nobody would ever be able to say why. A boat holds together because of what's underneath the waterline. Everything above it is just what people photograph. I'm going to come back to that. My wife's name was Diane. Everyone but me called her Dee. We were married 36 years. She died 8 years ago this coming November of a form of early onset Parkinson's that came with a kind of dementia nobody warned us about at the beginning, the kind where the tremor is almost the easy part and the disappearing is the hard part. She was diagnosed at 59. She was 64 when she died. I'm not going to walk you through the middle of that except to tell you one thing, because you need to know it before anything else in this story will make sense to you. In the last year, she did not know my face. 5 years of watching a woman I had loved since I was 26 lose the inside of her own life while her body kept right on living it. She lost the wedding. She lost the year we sailed to Desolation Sound and got fogged in for 3 days and thought it was the best thing that ever happened to us. She lost the morning our son was born. By the final winter, the only door I had left into her at all was photographs. I would sit on the edge of her bed with an album across my knees and hold up a picture and say, "That's you, Dee. That's you on the boat, the summer you were pregnant with Cole." And every so often, something would move behind her eyes for maybe 5 seconds. 5 seconds. That was the whole harvest, some days. So when I tell you later what somebody did with those photographs, I need you to already understand what they were. They were not decoration on a mantle. They were the last working road into my wife's mind, and I walked that road every single day for 2 years. My son is Cole. He's 38 now. He works as a claims adjuster for a regional insurance company, good steady work, and I have never once been anything but proud of the man he grew into professionally. His wife is Simone. She's 36. They married 12 years ago, and about 3 years into the marriage, they wanted their first house. And the numbers simply did not work the way they don't work for anybody starting out anymore. Simone had student loans from a program she never finished. They had some credit card debt left over from the wedding. The bank looked at the two of them and was not impressed. Cole came to my place on a Thursday night, sat at my kitchen table, and could barely get the words out. He was 26. I had buried his mother 14 months earlier, and I want to be honest with you about something right now, because it matters for everything that comes after it. I did not make that boy ask twice. I would have handed him the moon at that point in my life, if the moon came with a mortgage rate. I covered the down payment, I covered closing. And when the loan officer explained that, given their credit history, the cleanest path forward was putting the mortgage and the title in my name alone until they got stabilized. Everyone at that table nodded, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. Simone squeezed my hand across the table and said, "Just until we're on our feet, Holt. I promise." And I believed her. I want that on the record because I think in that exact moment she meant it. I set the payment to draft automatically out of my retirement account, and for 11 years, I never said one more word about it to anybody. That is not generosity. I need you to understand that now, because it's the whole failure sitting at the center of everything I'm going to tell you, and I'll come back to it before the end. I moved into the guest room of that house about 14 months after Dee died, because the house she and I had shared had gotten to where I couldn't be inside it after 4 in the afternoon without the walls closing in. And I want to be fair here, because I'm not going to let anyone take this part away from me either. The first 4 years were good, real good. Sunday dinners. I built the porch railing the second summer I lived there. Cedar and copper fittings. 40 hours of work spread over 6 weekends, and it's still the best joinery I've done outside of a hull. I set a small brass compass rose, no bigger than a silver dollar, inlaid into the top rail on the north corner, low where you'd only find it if you ran your hand along the wood. Boat builders do that. You leave a mark. Nobody notices, and you know it's there anyway. Simone used to bring me iced tea out to that porch while I worked and sit on the top step and ask me real questions about the wood, the grain, why cedar and not pine. That was genuine. I want to say that plainly, because it makes what happened later harder to explain, not easier. Then her parents retired. Grant and Deb Ashworth. Grant was 62 then. Deb was 59, and they started coming up from Tacoma for weekends, and the weekends got longer. And then there was a dresser drawer in the guest room, and then there was a second one, and then Deb's blood pressure monitor was living permanently on the bathroom counter, and nobody ever moved it again. Nobody announces that kind of thing. There is no single day where somebody moves in. There's a Tuesday 11 months down the road when you realize you haven't had the house to yourselves since spring. Grant had an opinion about every plank of that house, the paint color in the hall, the angle of the driveway, the way I'd stacked the firewood, which, for the record, I had been stacking correctly for 40 years before Grant Ashworth ever laid eyes on a cord of wood. And here's the thing about Grant that took me nearly 4 years to actually understand, and once I understood it, it changed the whole shape of how I think about that man. Grant Ashworth had never once in his life owned a house, not one. Simone told me later 14 rental units before she graduated high school, 6 different school districts. Her whole childhood measured out in a landlord's calendar and a U-Haul. And here he was at 62, sitting in a 4-bedroom house with a porch I'd built with copper fittings. And every time someone new came over, he gave them the tour. "This is our porch. This is the view we get in the evening. Come see the garden." He wasn't doing it to wound me. He was doing it because he was 62 years old and a guest in somebody else's house, yet again, and narrating it as his own was the only way a man built like that could get through an afternoon. I understood him about 4 years too late to do either one of us any good. Deb was a different animal entirely. Deb didn't need to be unkind. She simply conducted herself as though I wasn't occupying space in the room. If I started a sentence, she finished her own straight over the top of it. If I cooked dinner, she'd quietly order something in instead. And if I ever brought up Dee, anything, a memory, a joke Dee used to make, the subject changed inside of a single breath, every time. I tried over about 2 years, maybe a dozen times, and every single one got shut down before I finished the sentence. And then, in year 4, the photographs came off the hallway wall. I came home from a Saturday repair job. I still take the occasional small commission for people I've known 30 years. And I walked into that front hall, and something about the room felt wrong before I could name what it was. You know that feeling. It took me a full second. Our wedding photo gone from the end of the hall table. I went through the whole downstairs, every one of them. Dee and baby Cole on the dock, the summer of '92. The family portrait from the studio on Water Street in '98 that Dee made us all wear navy for. All of it gone. I found them in a plastic storage tote in the hall closet, underneath the Christmas decorations. I want you to sit with me on that for a moment, because that is the detail I genuinely could not get past afterward. Not in a spare bedroom, not in the garage. Under the Christmas decorations, which is the one shelf in every American house reserved for the things you take out exactly once a year and otherwise forget exist. Someone had taken every photograph of my dead wife off the walls of the house she was never once able to set foot inside, and filed her under seasonal. When I asked about it, Simone said she was going for a cleaner look through the main floor. A cleaner look. I carried one of those totes out to my truck that night, sat in the driveway in the dark, and cried harder than I had at that woman's own funeral. And it took me a long while to work out why. Here's why. At the funeral, I was grieving because Dee was gone, and grief is survivable. Everybody gets a turn at it eventually. In that driveway, I was grieving because somebody had made a decision, a small, quiet, weekday decision, made with a Sharpie and a plastic lid, that my wife's memory was clutter. Dee spent 5 years losing her own life one piece at a time to a disease that took no mercy on either of us, and I stood in my own driveway and watched somebody finish that job in about 10 minutes on an ordinary Tuesday. If you have ever had someone quietly remove the evidence of a person you loved, take down a photo, get rid of a chair, stop saying a name out loud, you already know this isn't the same thing as being insulted. An insult is loud. You can answer an insult. This is somebody editing the room while you're standing right there holding a truck key. After that, everything moved faster. To the neighbors, I stopped being Holt. I became Cole's dad. I heard a woman 2 doors down say exactly that about me while I was 11 feet away, coiling a garden hose. In year 5, I overheard Simone in the backyard on the phone, laughing about how they really needed to figure out a way to get some real privacy in their own house. And whoever was on the other end must have asked about me directly, because Simone said, "It's complicated," and laughed again. Complicated, about whether I lived there. I went inside that night and pulled up 11 years of bank statements at the kitchen table. Mortgage, property tax, homeowner's insurance, all of it drafting on the 3rd of every month, automatic, without fail, for 11 years running. I had the phone in my hand. I nearly stopped the payment right then. I want that on the record too, because I put the phone back down and told myself families go through hard stretches, and that Cole would come around eventually and notice what was actually happening under his own roof. Now let me talk about my son directly, because I've been putting it off, and it isn't fair to keep doing that. Cole didn't change all at once. He changed the way a riverbank erodes. You never see a single season do it, and then one year you look up and the water's 12 feet closer to the house than it used to be. If Simone wanted Thanksgiving at her parents' place, that's what happened. If Grant said something cutting about me across the dinner table, Cole studied his plate. There was never one argument I could point to and say, "That's the moment it broke." There were about 400 small silences instead, and every single one of them was louder in my chest than a shouting match would have been. It came to a head over a house that wasn't even the one we were living in. Simone had found a listing 40 minutes north, on the water, 5 bedrooms, a real dock, the kind of place with a name in the real estate listing instead of just an address. Grant had already walked the property twice, and the number the bank needed to make it work, given Cole and Simone's combined income and Simone's remaining loan balance, was a co-signer with clean credit and a paid-off primary residence, mine. They asked me on a Sunday evening. Over a dinner Simone had actually cooked herself for the first time in longer than I could remember, and I understood immediately why the good dinner had happened. Cole did the talking. He said it would just be a formality, a name on a piece of paper, that they'd refinance me off it within 2 years, the same way they always meant to do with the house I was already carrying. Simone sat there nodding, and Grant sat across from me with his arms crossed like a man watching a negotiation he'd already decided the outcome of. I said I needed to think about it. That should have been the end of the conversation for one night. It wasn't. Grant made a comment, light, almost joking, the kind of comment designed so that if you object to it, you're the one who made things awkward, about how a man my age sitting on a paid-off boat shop and an empty guest bedroom really ought to be looking for ways to be useful to the family instead of sitting on it. And Simone, and I want to be exact about this because I have replayed the sentence 100 times since, Simone laughed. Not unkindly. That's the part that still gets me. She laughed the easy laugh you use when you think everyone at the table already agrees with you, and said, to the mortgage broker Cole had on speakerphone finalizing pre-approval numbers in the next room, loud enough for the whole kitchen to hear, "Don't mind Holt, he's just kind of an old expense we drag from house to house at this point." An old expense, dragged along. Nobody at that table said one word after it. Cole looked at his plate. Grant almost smiled. Deb got up and started running water at the sink, which is what she always did instead of being part of a moment, and I picked up my coffee cup, finished it, sat down without a sound, and I looked at my son. I said, "No." That was the entire sentence. I did not explain it. I did not raise my voice one register. I stood up, thanked Simone for the dinner, and walked out to the porch I'd built with my own hands, and I sat down on the top step in the dark. Right over the little brass compass rows nobody in that house had ever noticed, and I looked out at the water for a long time. I did not tell them, that night or any night after it, one single word about whose name was actually on the deed to the house they were currently living in. Not one word. And I want to tell you exactly why, because it's the only part of that evening I'm still proud of. If I'd said it right then, sitting on that porch with my hands not quite steady, "This is my house, I hold the deed, I've made 132 payments on it with money that was never yours," it would have turned into a fight about money. Forever. That's the story they would have told about that night for the rest of their lives, and it would have buried the actual truth of it, which was never about the money at all. So I went inside, past all of them, up to the guest room, and I started quietly, over the next 4 days, packing a single duffel bag I did not admit to myself was a packed bag, and I thought about the keel. Because a boat holds together on account of the part underneath the waterline that nobody ever sees or thanks. And I had spent 11 years being exactly that, and I had been, God help me, proud of it. The whole time, not one person in that house had any real idea I was down there, still holding the strain. That's not their crime. That one is mine. I pulled over on the shoulder of Discovery Road about a mile from the house, cut the engine, and sat there for 20 minutes doing nothing at all. Then I called a woman named Priscilla Voss, who had handled Dee's estate paperwork 8 years earlier, and had done my will not long after. It was almost 9 at night. She picked up on the second ring, which told me something about the kind of friend she'd quietly become over the years without either of us ever saying so out loud. "Holt," she said. "What happened?" I told her. All of it, in about 4 minutes flat and even, the way you'd describe a structural problem in a hull to another boat builder. She was quiet for a second when I finished. "Come in Monday morning," she said. "First thing. I'll already have the file pulled." She had it pulled by Friday afternoon, in fact, before I even got there, because that's who Priscilla is. Monday morning she laid it out on her desk in a neat stack, and I sat across from her and looked at 11 years of my own life documented in ink, the warranty deed, my name, only my name, filed in 2013, never once amended. The mortgage originated in my name, drafted every month from an account that had never had another signer on it. 11 years and 2 months of property tax receipts, 9 homeowners policies, a new roof I'd paid for in 2019, a well pump replacement in 2021 that had cost $8,200, and that Cole, to this day, had no idea had ever happened, because it had happened on a Tuesday while he was at work, and the world had simply kept turning without him noticing. Priscilla squared the stack with her hands and looked at me over her glasses. "Holt, this has never once been their house. They live in it because you allow it. That is the entire legal situation, and it isn't close." Then she asked the question that actually mattered. What do you want out of this? I sat with that a long time. Long enough that she let the silence run without filling it, which is a rarer gift in a lawyer than you'd think. Finally, I said, I don't want to hurt my son. I just cannot keep paying the note on a house where I've been told, out loud, in front of a mortgage broker, that I'm an expense somebody drags around. She laid out 4 paths the way lawyers do. Keep paying and keep quiet. Ask them to leave on my own terms. Put the arrangement on paper as a real lease with real numbers. Or sell. I told her to sell it, driving back to the extended stay place I'd checked into out past the boatyard. I kept waiting to feel something like guilt. The way you brace for a wave you can already see coming. It never arrived. What came instead was something closer to the stillness right after you finish fairing a hull and run your palm along it. And there's nothing left to smooth. Not happy. Not proud. Just quiet, in a way I hadn't felt in longer than I wanted to admit. Dee used to say you cannot bail a boat that's still taking on water faster than you can lift the bucket. She said it to me probably 30 times over 36 years, usually about my own mother. I never once understood what she meant by it until I was 68 years old, sitting at a red light on Sims Way with a duffel bag on the passenger seat. 3 days later, Cole called, cheerful, breezy, like nothing at all had happened at that dinner table. Grant, it turned out, had offered to fly the 4 of them, Cole, Simone, and the 2 of them down to Palm Desert for a long weekend to clear everyone's head before the closing on the new house went through. He did not ask where I was staying. He did not ask if I was all right. He said nothing about the word expense or the porch or any of it. I let myself watch it unfold on my phone over the next few mornings, the way you can't help but press on a bruise. Simone by a pool, Grant at a grill, Deb under an umbrella, Cole with his arm around his wife in front of a wall of bougainvillea, captioned, finally exhaling. I let myself sit with that for maybe 10 minutes and then turned the phone face down, because self-pity is a chair that's far too comfortable to climb out of once you've settled into it. Then I got busy, and it turned out to be the best 2 weeks I'd had in years. Priscilla connected me with a realtor named Marisol Ibarra, who walked the property with me on a Friday morning and stopped cold in front of the porch railing. Who built this? She said, running her thumb along the copper fitting on the top rail without even seeing the little compass rose tucked into the corner. I told her I had. She looked at it properly for close to a minute. In 4 years, not one person in that house had ever said a single word to me about that railing. I put real money into the place that week, had it professionally cleaned, hired a painter for the front hall where the photographs used to hang, patched every nail hole myself, with my own hands, finally finished a section of dock decking I'd been meaning to get to since the year Dee died. I worked alongside a kid named Foster that Marisol knew, 24 years old, who called me Sir until I made him quit. Somewhere in the middle of the second afternoon, sanding down that old dock decking with the sun on my back, I caught myself whistling. Not because I was selling something out from under anybody. Because for the first time in about 4 years, I was building something again instead of just quietly absorbing something. Marisol called me on the following Tuesday, sounding a little stunned herself. 22 showings in 3 days. 8 offers by that Saturday, 4 of them all cash. I didn't take the highest one. I took an offer from a young couple, Marcus Delgado, a Coast Guard rescue swimmer stationed out of the air station, and his wife Priya, a pediatric nurse at the hospital in Port Angeles, who'd been renting for 6 years with a toddler in tow. They wrote a letter with their offer. Everybody tells you not to get sentimental about buyer letters. Priya wrote 3 sentences about that porch railing, said she wanted her daughter to grow up somewhere, with a real dock and a real place, to sit and watch the water while her husband was away on rescues. I read it twice, sat in my truck in the driveway, and put my hand around the small silver ring Dee's mother had given her that I'd worn on a chain since the funeral, and said out loud, to nobody, she'd have liked these 2. We closed on a Thursday. Cole, Simone, and the Ashworths flew home from Palm Desert on Friday. Here's the part people always want to know, and I need to be precise about how I handled it, because there is a version of this story where I'm simply a cruel old man, and that is not the man I want to be in it. Every single item belonging to Cole, Simone, Grant, and Deb was packed professionally. I hired a crew, 4 movers, 2 full days, everything inventoried, labeled by room, boxed with real care, and moved into a climate-controlled storage unit off Sims Way that I paid 90 days on in advance, under Cole's name, with the access code texted to both Cole and Simone at exactly 2:15 on Friday afternoon. I did not throw away one photograph, one receipt, one child's drawing off the refrigerator. I want that said plainly, because I was not trying to dismantle their lives. I was ending my financial support of 4 grown adults. And those are 2 entirely different acts. And I will argue that point with anyone who wants to take the other side of it. The first call came in at 2:16, then another, then Simone, then Cole. 19 missed calls before I made it down to a bench by the boat basin, where I sat and watched a heron work the shallows and did not pick up a single one of them. I got the rest of what happened secondhand, from Marisol, who got it from the Delgados themselves. They were about half an hour into carrying boxes in through the front door when the Ashworths' SUV came up the driveway too fast and stopped crooked across the lawn. Simone got out first, sunglasses still on, and told Priya Delgado she had the wrong house. Priya is 5'3", works 12-hour shifts in a pediatric ICU, and does not rattle easily. She said gently, "Ma'am, we closed on this house yesterday afternoon." Grant got loud out on that lawn, apparently, loud enough that a neighbor 2 doors down came out onto her own porch to watch. Marcus came around from the truck without raising his voice at all, walked over, and simply held open the closing folder he'd tucked into the cab. Simone went to the front door and tried her key. It didn't turn. I'd had the locks rekeyed on Thursday morning. Before the closing even finished, someone called it in, and a county deputy stood in that driveway and explained to my son, about as kindly as a stranger can explain a thing like that county records showed the parcel had transferred the previous day. Simone said something to Cole out there that got back to me later and that I have thought about more than almost anything else in this whole story. She said, "You told me he would never actually do something like this." He didn't answer her, because he'd believed that completely. He would have sworn to it under oath 24 hours earlier. The calls kept climbing, 31, 46. And then after dark, Cole left a voicemail that wasn't angry anymore at all. He said, "Dad, please, I don't understand." I sat on that bench in the dark with the phone in my hand and had a thought that reorganized the whole shape of the last 11 years for me on the spot. He genuinely hadn't known. Not once in 11 years had he looked at a deed. Not once had he asked whose account the payment drafted from. When the well pump failed in 2021 and the water came back on 2 days later, he'd never once asked what it cost or who had paid for it, not because he was hiding from the truth. Because it had happened automatically, and a thing that happens automatically for 11 straight years eventually stops registering as a thing that is happening at all. Convenience becomes invisibility every single time, without one person ever deciding it should. I called him back around 9. He picked up on the first ring, and he was crying, which I have heard out of that man maybe 3 times in his entire life. I said, "Cole, I didn't take your house away from you. I sold mine." There was a silence on that line. I'd put it close to 15 seconds. "It's been in my name since the day the two of you moved in," I said. "I've made 134 payments on it. I don't think you ever actually knew that." "No," he said. "Just that." Then, "Where are we supposed to go?" I told him about the storage unit and the 90 days, and that everything was packed with care and nothing was damaged. He asked me why, and I gave him the only honest answer I had. "Because I finally believed you," I said. "Your wife told a mortgage broker I was an expense you drag from house to house. You sat right there and let it stand. So I stopped being one." Then Simone got on the phone, and she was not crying at all. She was furious, talking fast about humiliation, about what I'd done to them in front of a stranger and a deputy on their own front lawn, about what a father supposedly owes a son. I let her get most of the way through it before I said, "I owe my son love. I never once owed him a mortgage." And then I hung up, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I turned the phone all the way off, and I slept 9 straight hours. The month after that was quiet in a way that frightened me at first. For years, quiet in my life had meant somebody somewhere was upset with me, and there was a job waiting to be fixed. Quiet used to mean go make it right. This quiet just sat there, patient, not asking anything of me. After about 3 weeks, I finally understood what it actually was. It wasn't loneliness. It was room. I bought a small place outside Anacortes, 2 bedrooms, white with gray trim, 4 blocks off Fidalgo Bay, close enough to hear the ferry horn most evenings. Paid cash. No mortgage, no lien, nothing on that deed belonging to another living soul. My new neighbor came over with a plate of lemon bars before I'd even finished unloading the truck. Odalys Fenn, 71, has lived on that street since the Reagan administration and knows the entire history of everyone on it and will tell you all of it whether you ask or not. By that first evening, I'd met 4 other people who knew absolutely nothing about what had happened down in Port Townsend and didn't require anything from me at all beyond a hand to shake. I started volunteering with a small outfit that builds ramps and does repair work for elderly folks and veterans who can't manage their own homes anymore, which is exactly the kind of work my hands were built for. One Saturday in October, we framed out a wheelchair ramp for a man named Silas Duran, 89, Korea, lives alone, sharp as a tack. When we finished, he stood at the top of that ramp and shook my hand with both of his and thanked me like nobody had done a single thing for him in years. Gratitude, it turns out, isn't loud. I had genuinely forgotten that. Most of the time it's one short sentence somebody actually means. Through Priscilla, and later through Cole himself, I learned how the months afterward had actually gone for them. A 2-bedroom rental over in the Uptown district, and a monthly budget that turned out to be about $900 a month more expensive than either of them had ever fully understood their old life to cost, because the largest single bill in that household had been drafting quietly out of an account in Anacortes that nobody had thought to check since 2013. The new house up north with the private dock fell through within a week. Once the bank saw there was no longer a cosigner and no longer a paid-off primary residence sitting behind the application, Grant and Deb moved back to their own condo in Tacoma inside of 2 months. There simply wasn't room anymore. For the first time in over a decade, nobody else in that family was quietly carrying the weight of everybody else. Cole called in December. He'd picked up weekend shifts doing warehouse inventory to help cover the gap on top of his regular job. I told him I was proud of him. He went quiet on the line for a second, and then he said, "I didn't expect you to say that." And then, "Dad, I had no idea what any of it actually cost you. Any of it." Before he hung up, he told me he loved me, which he had not said out loud to me since his mother's funeral. I sat on my new porch until it got fully dark that night. That wasn't forgiveness yet. It was a beginning, and those two things are not the same, and anyone who tries to tell you otherwise is selling you something. In January, Priscilla sent me a small box she'd found while closing out an old storage bin in her file room, records from the original house purchase back in 2013. At the bottom of it was a manila envelope that wasn't hers and wasn't mine. Dee's handwriting on the front, in the loose, looping hand she still had before the tremor started taking it away from her. Inside were old canceled checks, a printout of that very first amortization schedule, and a photograph of Cole and me on the dock the summer he turned 9, holding up a rock cod that was smaller than we were, clearly trying to make it look in the picture. On the outside of that envelope, in Dee's handwriting, she'd written 3 words, "House for Cole." She'd started that envelope before she ever got sick. She thought the two of us were quietly building our son a foundation. I sat on my kitchen floor in Anacortes with that envelope in my hands and had a thought I've now had a few hundred times since. A keel is not a thing a boat builder keeps holding on to with his own 2 hands once the hull is finished. That is the entire point of laying one properly. A keel lets everything above it stand up and carry its own weight, on its own, in open water, without you underneath it forever. I had poured 100 of them over 41 years. And I hadn't given my son a keel at all. I had gotten underneath him in 2013 and simply stayed there for 11 years, and every single year he stood up a little less on his own, and I carried a little more, and I called the whole arrangement being a good father. Cole came up to see me in March. He texted first, asked if he could visit, and I answered with 2 words, Anytime, son. He looked different when he got out of the car, heavier through the shoulders from warehouse work, new lines around his eyes he hadn't had in the fall, real wear on his work boots for the first time in years. We sat on my porch swing a long while before either of us said anything, just watching the ferry cross the bay. Then he said, "I let it happen." He told me he'd spent years telling himself that staying neutral was the same thing as keeping the peace, that if he never picked a side, nothing would ever blow up. But not picking a side, he said, meant you were standing there completely alone every single time, and some part of me always knew it. He told me he'd spent 2 nights going through every document Priscilla had sent over, every payment, every year of it, on his own, without anyone asking him to. "I never once asked whose account it came out of," he said. "You trusted me with all of it, and I never once looked." I told him those were 2 different things, and I'd rather he not confuse them, because the second one wasn't true. "You didn't use me, Cole. You just never looked." He asked me why I never told him no all those years, and I gave him the answer I'd worked out sitting on that kitchen floor back in January. Because somewhere after you turned about 26, I confused helping you with protecting you, and a man can't actually do both at once. Helping somebody makes them stronger. Protecting them just keeps them exactly where they already are. I held your hand about 15 years past when you needed it, and the cost of that is you turned 38 before you found out what a house really costs. That afternoon, Odalus came by with more lemon bars, and a fellow from the volunteer crew stopped in about a leaking gutter, and both of them talked to Cole like he was just somebody's son visiting town, and I watched my boy's face while they did it. Nobody in Anacortes knew one thing about what had happened down south, and they thought well of me anyway. I told him afterward, respect mostly comes from what a man does this month, not from what he did back in 2013. Simone came up 3 weeks after that. Cole asked first, and I asked him directly whether she genuinely wanted to come or just felt she had to, and he said, "I think she finally wants to." She arrived on a Saturday, thinner in the face, all the old sharpness gone out of her posture, and she handed me a box wrapped in brown paper. The photographs, every single one. Our wedding. Dee and Cole on the dock in '92. The Navy family portrait from Water Street. 2 of the frames had cracked in storage, and she'd had them replaced herself, out of her own pocket, and never once mentioned it. I found the receipt folded in the bottom of the box later. She stood on my new porch and told me why she'd done what she'd done all those years back. She told me her father had never once in his life owned a house, 14 rentals, 6 schools. She said she could describe in exact detail the specific feeling of watching your mother pack up a kitchen because a landlord had decided something without asking. And then I was 24, she said, and we finally had a house, and it wasn't mine. The deed had your name on it. The walls had your wife's photographs on them. The neighbors called it your house, and you were right down the hall. She told me she'd convinced herself she was just going for a cleaner look through the main floor. Then her voice broke, and she told me the true version. "I was trying to make that house mine," she said, "and the only way I could think how was to take you out of it, one small piece at a time. And you were the easiest thing to take, because you never once said anything about it." I stood there on my own porch and didn't say what I was thinking for a good 10 seconds, because here's the thing, I understood her. Completely, instantly, in a way I hadn't been able to for the better part of 4 years. It didn't undo the plastic tote under the Christmas decorations. It didn't make any of it right, but I understood exactly how a person arrives at that place. She wasn't cruel by nature. She was 24 years old, had never once had a place of her own, and finally got one with an asterisk stapled to it, and she spent years trying to erase the asterisk. I was the asterisk. "I thought," she said, "that because you never said anything, it never cost you anything." That's the whole story, right there. In one sentence, she told me she didn't expect any of it fixed that day. I told her it wouldn't be. I told her I'd already forgiven her before she'd even gotten out of the car, because forgiveness is the easy half of this kind of thing. Trust is the part that takes actual years to rebuild. And I'm 68, so we'd better get started. 2 years on now, Cole and Simone bought a house of their own, a small one over in Sequim, entirely on their own terms. Simone went back to finish her degree part-time. Cole kept the warehouse shifts for 19 months until the down payment was covered, out of an account that has only their two names on it. They asked me to come plant a Japanese maple in the front yard with them, not to pay for a single thing about it, just to be there in the dirt. I knelt down in that soil with my son on one side of me and his wife on the other, and I thought about Dee's envelope the whole time. Sunday dinners are back now. Sometimes at their place, sometimes at mine when they make the drive up. Grant and Deb visit twice a year, and Grant is quieter than he used to be, and I've started actually asking him about all those places he lived as a young man, and it turns out there are some real stories buried in there. My granddaughter, Cole and Simone, had a daughter last year. They named her Diane, after her grandmother she'll never meet. Was up visiting with them on the porch last month. 6 years old, sharp as anything, and she found the little brass compass rose I'd inlaid into a new railing I built for my own porch up here, and she asked me why it was hidden where nobody could see it. I told her some things hold everything else up, precisely because nobody's looking at them. She thought about that for a second, the way only a 6-year-old fully commits to thinking about something. And then she said, "So it's like a secret that's doing a job." I haven't been able to shake that sentence since. She said it better than I ever could in 6 words at 6 years old. So here's what this whole thing actually taught me, and it isn't the lesson everybody expects. Everyone wants the takeaway to be set better boundaries. Fine, true enough as far as it goes. The real one is this: the money was never what any of them actually took from me. I made 134 mortgage payments on that house, and I never once flinched at a single one, and I would do every one of them again tomorrow without hesitation. Not one time in 11 years did the money itself keep me up at night. What ended it was a plastic tote in a hall closet, and one sentence spoken too easily in front of a stranger on speakerphone. People will tell you a family conflict is about money, because money is the part you can put a number on. It almost never actually is. It's about who gets to remain visible in a room, and the real mechanism at work is never taking. It's removal, and removal doesn't announce itself. Nobody ever tells you your photographs are being reclassified as seasonal storage. Your chair just quietly migrates to a corner one day. Your name slowly turns into somebody else's relationship to you. Your workshop turns into an opportunity for square footage. You will always notice when somebody takes something from you outright. You will almost never notice somebody removing you because there's no single moment attached to it. There's just a Tuesday when the hallway looks different, and you can't quite say why. So here's the one thing I genuinely ask you to do, and it will cost you about 11 seconds of discomfort and nothing more. If you are quietly carrying a cost for somebody, a payment, a bill, something drafting out of your account every month that nobody in the house has ever once mentioned out loud, say the number once on some ordinary evening, not in the middle of a fight, not to collect on it. Just pick a calm Tuesday and say plainly, "I want you to know what this actually costs, and I'm glad to carry it, and I'm not asking you for anything back." Because a cost that's never spoken out loud can never once be appreciated. It can't even properly be resented. It can only be assumed, and once something's been assumed long enough, it disappears entirely, and eventually you disappear right along with it. My son was 38 years old before he ever heard the actual number. That wasn't his fault. I'm the one who never said it. There's a small brass compass rose set into the porch railing of a house down in Port Townsend that I'll never see again. The Delgados sent me a photograph of it last Christmas. A string of lights wrapped once around that top rail. They don't know it's there for any particular reason. That's fine. It's still holding everything up just the same.